Hello and welcome to the second in our series of informational webinars highlighting our 35th year in the sales training business here at the Brooks Group. Thank you all so very much for joining us. My name is Jeb Brooks and I'll be your host for the next 35 minutes, but I'd like to go ahead and welcome our guest, Paul Bilodeau, our VP of Sales and Marketing here.
Thank you, Jeb.
Paul, we're talking today about how our listeners can help their teams become more effective prospectors. I guess we're helping them to answer the question, what should I be doing to get my people in front of more qualified prospects? Is that fair?
Absolutely, yes.
Well, let's just begin by asking a kind of a fundamental question, which is this. What are the realities of sales prospecting today?
Well, there's a few points that we want to make, but let me just start by saying we want to make sure that we are focusing in on sales managers or people playing that sales leadership role. What we're asking is that they pay more attention to actually intervening or taking action in their sales team's prospecting efforts. And so what's happened is there's a few, again, realities that we want to touch on. And the first one has to do with how much time salespeople are actually spending prospecting. So let me show you some stats. This comes from CSO Insights, which is a research firm that we often refer to in the industry. Less than 19% of their time is spent actually prospecting.
So salespeople are spending less than 19% of their time doing these activities we're talking about.
You got it.
Okay.
All right. And then we have less than 12% on closing activities. And you may say, well, where are they spending their time? Which is traveling, administration, meetings in the office. It could be dealing with customer service issues, putting out fires, etc.
All things that have to be done.
All things that have to be done. Yet, if you look at those stats, I'm sure there's many listeners right now that are saying 19% of their time prospecting. I think that's high. My people spend a lot less than that. And that's the feedback that we get from our clients as well.
And often they spend less than that because they rely on marketing to take care of that for them.
They do. So let's take a look at that for a second. Where is marketing in the lead generation world? And here's where they are. They're usually playing in this space, branding and product marketing. And they do a wonderful job at that. And what I'm suggesting is that both of these elements of marketing are extremely important. However, here's what we don't see. What we don't see is a lot of effort on the marketing, or a lot of results on the marketing side, where we're actually seeing lead generation, where we're actually receiving quality leads, we're being assisted in positioning our salespeople to be that trusted advisor in the marketplace. And for another example would be dealing with those early objections and tools, case studies, white papers, etc., that might assist them to deal with those early objections, which will, again, help them to be positioned with their target markets.
You shared this stat down in the bottom part of the slide with me earlier today. That shocks me.
Yeah, it shocked me too, actually, but how true it is. And I'll tell you that I have a confession to make myself.
I'm ready.
Being the VP of Sales and Marketing, there are times that I know some of the leads that we forward our sales team here actually are not that well qualified. And that's a specific challenge that we have that we need to address on a regular basis.
So this is not a unique challenge. And in other words, if our listeners face this, they're not alone.
No, not at all. Not at all. So here's what people are doing is they're looking to technologies and saying, well, technology must be the panacea. There are great lead generation tools, demand gen tools out there that can assist us in pulling these leads into our sales team. But the reality is that this is a myth. At this point in time, you cannot replace what I'll call traditional and also what I'll call modern day prospecting strategies with these technologies.
I couldn't agree with you more on this, Paul. And I've done a lot of work looking at the technologies that are available in the sales world. And I think you're right. Nothing beats that old-fashioned face-to-face prospecting work. But you make an interesting point here, and that's that many salespeople are not wired for initiating contact, for doing this kind of work.
That's right.
What do you mean?
Right. Well, what we mean by that is you have salespeople whose behavior styles are perhaps more suited to deal with technical issues, with, shall I say, the science behind their products and services, industry-related issues, let's say, more economic and business-focused issues, so more of a business acumen. And all of those skills are actually demanded in order to sell effectively in today's world, all right? However, there's still a lot of these people who, with all of those strengths, have this hard wiring in their behavior style not to go out and actually initiate contact with people. So, in other words, you'll hear the old term of, I'm really great in the living room, it's just difficult to get in there. And so, do we look for technologies to do that? No. Do we wait for the phone to ring? Many times. Do we look for leadership from our sales manager? Well, many times we do, but what we typically get from the sales manager is just this. Get out there and make more calls.
And if I'm not wired to be able to do that effectively, then that doesn't work.
Exactly. So I'm not going to do that. So what you have is individuals who are extremely talented in the sales arena, but perhaps are not necessarily wired to go out and initiate contact. That's why we're suggesting that we need to take a stance as sales leaders, and we need sales managers to actually intervene.
So it's not going to be marketing coming in to save the day. It's not going to be technology coming in with some sort of an app or a piece of hardware that'll save the day.
No.
It's not necessarily going to be the salespeople themselves. What I'm hearing you say is that the sales managers on the call today, the listeners today, need to step in.
Absolutely.
And you're going to give us some detailed strategies for doing that.
Yes, and I want to start with one theme, an overall theme that everyone should grasp, and that is this theme here. So we want to focus in on creating meaningful sales conversations. And we want these meaningful sales conversations to be addressing their customers' overall business needs.
So the sales leaders on the phone, if they're focused on this, are going to enable their salespeople to prospect more effectively.
Well, we're going to use this theme, let's say. Okay. So what we mean is we need to start putting our salespeople in a position where they can teach, where they can send certain messages to certain groups that they wish to target. So if we can put them in positions where they're actually teaching or seen as a teacher or an educator or a trusted resource, then we're in a situation where salespeople are likely going to be pulled into these opportunities instead of trying to push their way in. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. But the obvious next question is,
yes.
How? How can we do this?
Yes. Well, let's take a look. All right. First is segmentation. And a lot of times what we have as sales managers is we would again say, well, everyone needs one of these products or everyone needs one of these services. So get out there and sell. And we need to be a little bit more strategic around that. And so what I recommend is you go through a segmentation exercise where we need to break down specific target markets that we will likely have the most success with based on our product offering and our ability to deliver. Okay. Next thing we need to do is we need to spend time educating. We need to educate our salespeople on what some of the key business drivers are that are having certain implications within each of these markets. So if we can educate our salespeople and teach them on how to educate themselves by participating in those association meetings and reading the newsletters and using a tool such as Google Alerts and making it using technologies to educate themselves on all of those resources, then we're able to identify exactly what are the challenges in these markets, and then that leads us to how we can position. So then we identify where the gaps are in the markets. Now let's go out there and position ourselves accordingly. And I want to touch on each of these. And then finally is creating these referral sources. So who can we partner with or align ourselves with who are likely to, again, pull us into these opportunities within each of our target market segments?
So I want to just say quickly, for the benefit of our listeners out there, we're going to provide a recording of this webinar to you. So as we're working through this, there's going to be some really good ideas that I want you to pay particular attention to, but know that you'll have this as an ongoing resource to use moving forward. So with that, Paul, let's talk segmentation. How do we do this?
Great. Well, let's touch on this. It's really simple. I mean, we want to target these specific market segments. So who are they? Do we separate them by region, by size, by speciality, by, let's say, I'll call it a certain attitude okay, as to whether or not they're embracing a technology or a methodology that might be new in the marketplace, whether or not they've accepted a certain technology, or whether or not perhaps, again, they are a certain size of an organization that tends to gravitate towards choosing you over alternatives. And we want to make sure that they're attractive markets. So are they in a growth spurt right now? Are they profitable markets? Do they tend to buy those higher margin products and solutions from us? And then where is our position within those markets? Do we have a strong position? Are we well known? You know, in marketing, we refer to it as brand awareness, and there's the assisted and unassisted versions of brand awareness. Are we well known in that industry, and how are we positioned? Are we positioned as trusted advisors, or, unfortunately, maybe we're positioned more so as the product pushers? So we need to break away from that and change the views of that market.
Paul, in your opinion, should our listeners be doing this with their teams or for their teams?
You want to do this with your teams. So, in other words, we don't want to do this for them. We want to do all the work for them. But what we want to do is demonstrate to them how it's done. Let me give you a little example. Recently, as in yesterday, we're consulting with a client, and they were discussing how do we go about truly leading our salespeople down the path of segmentation and understanding the different markets. And I'm jumping ahead a little bit here, Jeb, but I always say go to your existing market, your existing customers, and do a little segmentation with your existing account list, and you will find, because success leaves clues, you will find that you've already carved out these certain market segments that have found you attractive, that you are very well positioned within, and then we look to expand upon that. And that's a great point to start with. And next is, let's get on the web. Let's take a look at some of the associations. Let's find out with these associations where they might be having their next lunch and learn. And I'm telling you, these associations are just begging for great content, great speakers. They're begging for articles for their newsletters because they want to drive their subscribers. They want to bring value to their membership. And if you can fill that gap, that's one strategy. That's an example.
So you hinted at this next point, but with that little anecdote, and that's education. How do we do that?
Well, let's touch on this education piece. What we want to find out are, what are the key market drivers? All right, what's the business language, the financial language? In other words, and I like to use the TLAs. What are the TLAs of each of these markets?
Those three-letter acronyms.
You got it. All right. So, for example, if I'm talking to senior level telecom, well, I'm referring to customer acquisition, cost of acquisition, churn rate. I'm talking about ARPU, which is average revenue per unit, and I use terminology that is let's say, indoctrinated into that particular industry. Now, what's also interesting is if we take it the next step further, we identify certain regulation changes. So there's regulatory changes, or there's new policies that are perhaps coming into play, and there's all this anxiety around how does this impact my world? So if we can educate ourselves around these drivers, around these influencing factors that are taking place within each of these market segments, then we have the opportunity to move to the next step, Jeb. And the next step, and we've touched on these, the next step is to actually educate them in some kind of a forum. So here's some more hints for our listeners. Educating target markets on what? What are the potential landmines and pitfalls? Do you have any unique market perspectives, new alternatives, technologies, efficiencies, etc.? Let's take a look at how we can be proactive and get out there, and we are the organization and we are the individuals that deliver these messages. Now, here's what's interesting. This can be confused with working harder, but it's actually working smarter. And when you're in a rut and when you need to increase your sales, we always migrate back to pick up the phone or get out there and make more calls. And then we get frustrated, and then we lose focus. And in that process, we actually misposition ourselves as that product pusher because we're not showing up with relevancy. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. If we're not coming to visit our prospects and customers with value, we're really not doing any good. And this final point here it really speaks to that. How can we quantify the financial value of what it is we're doing for our prospects? Can you speak a little bit more to that point?
Well, what I'm saying is, in other words, you are a partner in the boardroom, or you're creating some kind of a tool that would allow them to evaluate whether or not a certain technology can truly make a financial impact on that organization. So you do a little work ahead of time. You meet with some key clients of yours that you already have a relationship with. You explain to them that this is what we're trying to build, is a financial tool that will assist people in your industry to make better decisions around whether or not they should incorporate a technology that everyone's talking about, but yet few have perhaps jumped on the bandwagon. So what we do is we do the work on their behalf. We do the research on their behalf. And what that does is, again, helps us to position ourselves as that trusted advisor. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. And really getting to this idea of positioning is absolutely essential. How your teams are positioned out there, listeners, is critical to your success and, of course, to theirs.
Right. So in this case, let's take, how do we actually take this information and go to the market and stand in front of them, figuratively and sometimes literally, and say to them, look at the information that I have that's relevant to you. So this creates opportunities. We want to, everyone out there, if you are in a sales leadership role, you really need to step it up and create these opportunities for your salespeople. And I'm telling you, they will not do it themselves. Or if they do, they're an exceptional hire. All right? So what we need to do is assist them and engage marketing and build case studies and create these little seminars and lunch and learns and webinars so that we are bringing value to the target markets you want to position yourselves within. I'll give you a quick little example as we work through these. Place them in situations where they're viewed as a resource. I was working as a consultant with one of my clients, and this is in the oil services world. This client, again, was struggling where you have technical salespeople who are asked to go out and initiate contact with decision makers. Those technical salespeople are not necessarily wired to initiate contact with decision makers. So their approach is largely what they know, what they were taught, what they grew up with, what they learned on those initial ride-alongs when they went through their training with those senior reps, unfortunately. And they pick up the phone and they make that call. And the phone call goes something like this. Yeah, John, listen, I wondered what your volume was looking like over the next few quarters. Maybe we can get together and I could buy you coffee.
Ouch.
Right. You know, and I'm hearing these phone calls and I'm thinking, wow, there's not a lot of relevancy. There's not a lot of value. Why would I want to meet with you? So here's what literally happened in 45 minutes. I called a quick sales meeting. I started asking what are the key challenges within the market segment that we're trying to target. We identified this one particular market segment. We quantified the volume of business out there. We made notes of how we were positioned. We found out that there's a few key challenges that are relative to a new environmental standard that was coming down from the governing bodies in the oil patch. And we decided that if we could educate ourselves on this, that the rest of our decision makers out there whom we were looking to gain access to would actually appreciate hearing our insights. So we go to a third party. We do our interview. We talk to a few customers. We talk to a few people who are, again, considered experts. We pull a few of those experts together, and we, in 45 minutes, organize an event at the Chamber of Commerce in a downtown major center, and we send out an email blast inviting all of these people that are in our database. And out of 300 that we invited, we had 150 people respond, and we had the room filled with just under 70 people. And at the end of it all, we had some follow-up white papers. As a result of it, we had 8, now I repeat, just 8, but 8 solid leads. And it led to just over $500,000 in business.
All as a result of educating your market.
Educating the market and positioning the salespeople in a position where they're standing around the room representing the organization that is, again, bringing value to a target market segment. Okay. Now, another point here, we need to be that that catalyst that steps in and engages marketing. All right? And that means that you need to go and meet with the marketing team and say, here's where you can really help us, and educate them just as well as you're educating your salespeople. Now, lastly, if you don't track the results, Jeb,
you're not going to get a whole lot of support.
Well, not a ton of support and not a ton of budget. So you're in a situation where if you can track this and feed this back to senior management, then all of a sudden you've got more people that are so-called drinking the Kool-Aid. More people that are saying, I see the results you're getting, therefore I'm willing to allocate budget dollars to this. And now all of a sudden you have more successful events and more successful engagements, which leads to this greater positioning.
This has been really valuable so far. I think our listeners have certainly gotten a lot of ideas out of this, but let's take it to a really tactical level. Let's give them an idea that they can walk out of this webinar with and engage in tomorrow. Okay, so what I like to do when we are consulting with clients is say, look, here's a real easy place to start, all right? All you need to do is get together and we've got our market segment in mind, all right? We have a clear idea of what that market segment is, and we create a few questions that would result in a meaningful conversation with the customers within that market segment. And so we create those list of questions, and we can do that ourselves, or we can do that with marketing, or we can do that with a few of our top sales reps. And then we turn that into, in quotes, a marketing survey. So in other words, I'm going to facilitate that these salespeople have meaningful business conversations, but I'm literally disguising it as a market survey. And makes it a little less threatening, doesn't it? Well, to the salespeople who aren't wired to go out and initiate contact, yes, it does. All right. Now you see how that initial call goes. John, I'd like to maybe take you for coffee and pick your brain about a few things and get your opinions on a few questions that we have, because we're trying to get this information for our marketing department. You actually mandate that the salespeople complete these surveys. And yes, I said mandate. By a certain date, they need to complete 15 to 20 of these with existing customers. Now, when they go out, what do you think happens? I think the sales magically appear. All of a sudden, these opportunities rise to the surface, and they said, wow, we should do more of these marketing surveys. It's unbelievable. You know that these customers have these challenges, and we might be able to help them with that. And we sit back as sales leaders and smile and say, no kidding, really? And this really speaks beautifully to the Peter Drucker statistics, that we stand a 1 in 2 chance of selling more to an existing customer. All you're suggesting that our listeners do is dispatch their salespeople out to their existing customers and ask a few questions. Right. Which is really what those sellers should be doing anyway, but maybe if there's a little bit of resistance, we can, as you said, sort of disguise that effort. You know, there's a customer in Houston that we deal with that sells a very technical service. And this gentleman and I were talking. And I said, now, you sell to these engineers. He said, yes, I do. And I said, all right, and how many orders do you typically get in a quarter? And he said, well, I typically get anywhere from 10 to 15 of these orders. And I said, well, who has sent you the most orders recently? Well, this company. And I said, well, how do they go about making a decision to allocate budget to these particular projects? And there was silence. He says, I don't really know. And I said, well, what typically triggers them to go ahead with a project versus one that they don't go ahead with? And he said, I'm not sure. And these are customers that he's been dealing with for 3 to 5 years. So my question was, wouldn't it be nice if we knew these things? And he said, yes. I said, I'm going to make a list of questions, and I want you to go see all your existing customers and ask these questions. And let's find out if we really understand what their motivations were. And lo and behold, he comes back with just over $1.2 million in business by having those more meaningful business conversations. Okay, Paul, so we've talked about segmentation, we've talked about education and positioning. Yes. Let's talk about this final point here on how to enable our sales teams to prospect more, which is referral sources. You've got a pretty creative approach here. Well, yeah, and again, I want to make this very, what I'll call street ready, very practical, very pragmatic. It's not uncomplicated here, folks. Referral sources, and you know what? The majority of your top salespeople are already doing this. So all we do is we're going to identify some non-competing products or services. All right, who else has access to our customers, but they don't necessarily compete with us? And
they sell to the same people within the same target markets, and they may be well positioned and as that trusted advisor. And again, the other opportunity is they tend to be engaged at a time when the buyer is more in a state where they're triggering or they're thinking about perhaps buying what it is that you're selling. And it's at that very front end, the beginning state of the buying process. All right. And if we can identify those types of organizations, then what we're going to do is we're simply going to arrange a meeting with these people. And we are looking to meet with them such that we can help each other out. I'm going to, because I find out that you sell a service to customers that I have already access to and a strong relationship with. If I understand a little bit more about your service, Jeb, it actually might help my positioning within my customer and their target market. If I can bring you in such that you can provide them with value through your services, through your offering. And I'll give you an example of what I mean by this, but we actually want to develop relationships with those influential salespeople that again, sell within the same market segments that we do. So let me give you an example. Let's say I'm selling office furniture, all right? And I've decided that there's a particular niche out there with law firms. So I'm going to target law firms, and I may segment even further, and I'm going to target law firms that are in the Northeast that have let's say more than 200 lawyers that are practicing in that firm. And I decide that the best way to do this is to go after the managing partners of the firm because, again, through my education of the target market, I've identified that managing partners are typically the decision makers. So what I do is I align myself with somebody who sells legal IT software of some kind. Okay? I align myself with an ad agency that's specifically focused on law firms. Okay? I align myself with a document management company. I align myself with an office equipment company that perhaps has special equipment or solutions geared towards law firms. And I align myself with property managers, with interior designers, with commercial real estate agents. Now, the top ones you see there are all people that will most likely have access to decision makers and are familiar with the market segments that we have. All right. The bottom ones are more focused, again, on those markets, yet they're positioned at the front end of the buying process. For example, take an interior designer. If somebody is going to refresh the look and the brand of their offices, they're going to hire an interior designer, and that interior designer is aware of this before you are. So now you're able to identify that opportunity by being aligned with that interior designer. Make sense?
Makes perfect sense.
And then you'll see property managers, commercial real estate, etc. And anyone can do this for any industry.
Yeah, so I mean, here we're using office furniture and law firms as a kind of a placeholder, but I can certainly see how this could work with any number of selling environments out there.
We've aligned ourselves with recruiters that specialize in hiring sales leaders. So we know that what happens is when there's a new vice president of sales that starts at an organization, they typically want to incorporate change, and that means they want to train their salespeople. And if we can be at the right place at the right time by being aligned with those people, then we see the opportunity before a competition does. We have a better chance of positioning ourselves better.
Everybody can do this. But right now, let's open it up, Paul. We've got some time for questions, and we want to make sure that we spend some time listening to those. We've already had a couple submitted. I see one here from Phil. You mentioned, Paul, sending information regarding regulations to my target market, but I don't have a highly regulated industry. What should I be sending?
Well, I mean, if there are no regulations around your industry, then you may look at other factors. Perhaps maybe there's a new technology that is emerging. Everyone's talking about it. People are reluctant to jump on the bandwagon. Maybe there's a new accounting software. Maybe there's a new technique or strategy that people, again, are discussing. A few people have tried it, but there's a lot of fear and anxiety around that. So you educate yourself on exactly what those implications may be. You maybe tie yourself to an industry consultant. And then from there, what you're able to do is collectively with that consultant go and deliver, say, a lunch and learn to a group.
So find other examples of content that will make a difference in your customer's world.
Yes.
Again, feel free to send those questions our way. We're happy to do that. I've got another one here from Susan, Paul, and this is actually kind of designed directly for you, given your role. How can I better engage with marketing? So Susan, I guess, is a sales leader and is wondering how she can better engage with her marketing cohorts.
Well, what I always say is selling internally is exactly like selling externally. So in other words, if you're trying to connect with marketing to get them more engaged, you need to understand how they are measured and what success looks like for them and what are their challenges, such that you can make a suggestion that is in alignment with their direction. And once you do that, you get greater buy-in. And the other line I like to use is really we support what we help create. So if we have marketing that's assisting us in the creation of, say, a webinar, like what we're doing, then you have the opportunity to get more buy-in from marketing. Does that make sense?
It does. And I think back to the statistic you shared, the Marketing Sherpa number, which really has affected me. 80% of marketers saying that they've sent unqualified leads to sales.
Right.
What that tells me we need to be doing is doing a better job of working with marketing to define a lead. If we both agree on what a qualified lead is, we can probably more effectively work together.
Absolutely.
Fair?
Absolutely. And it's ironic that you mentioned that. Recently, we just had another research paper that's come out from the CSO Insights. And again, they spoke directly about that, where you have more success in terms of lead conversion when you've arrived at simply defining what that qualified lead is.
It makes all putting a label on something certainly does help. But again, we do need to move on. So if there are questions we didn't get answered, we will respond to those as soon as possible following the session here. But there are a couple of more quick points to make. One is, Paul, our next webinar,
yes,
which is going to be on LinkedIn. We're going to focus in on how our listeners can more effectively use LinkedIn in business-to-business sales.
Yes.
There's a lot of talk out there about this, but quite frankly, we need to focus in on how business-to-business sellers and their leaders can more effectively use that. So keep an eye on that. June 14th coming up. Again, it's our 35th anniversary, so we want to provide some content to you that way. And then one more point here, Paul. I'd like to ask you to speak to our modern-day prospecting program coming up in May.
Well, let me just temper this by saying we always consult with our clients and say, whenever you're going to do a webinar, make sure it's non-commercial in nature. Make sure that you're bringing value to people without making it just another infomercial. But because the topic is so relevant, I wanted to at least make our listeners aware of a workshop that we're putting on in Atlanta on May 9th. And it is the modern day prospecting, where we're going to actually work with the salespeople and sales managers together in the morning, talking about these concepts. And then I'm taking a group of sales managers, and another facilitator of ours is taking the group of salespeople into separate rooms in the afternoon, and it's all around building their specific prospect plan that they can walk away and apply immediately.
Well, I know there's already some excitement about that program, and I certainly hope some of our listeners will be able to join in. But with that said, I want to say thank you so very much for your time, Paul. I really do appreciate you spending it with us today.
My pleasure, Jeb. Thank you.
And that's all from the Brooks Group right now. Thank you for your 35 minutes. We certainly hope you've enjoyed our time together. If you have additional questions about the material, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Otherwise, we wish you the happiest of sales leadership. Thank you so very much.